Welcome to Life Stories, where we explore the extraordinary moments hidden in everyday lives. Today's story is a heartfelt journey of a mother's unwavering love, a father's realization of what truly matters, and a little girl caught between two worlds. Through pain, resilience, and compromise, this family finds their way to an unconventional but beautiful bond. Join us as we uncover the lessons of love, forgiveness, and the power of connection. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to follow along with today's moving tale of hope and family. Let's begin. The courtroom in Austin, Texas, buzzed with tension as the final moments of the custody battle unfolded. It was one of those days where the air felt heavy, the kind of day where even the sunlight outside seemed muted. Inside, it was even darker, emotionally. At least, I sat on one side of the courtroom, clutching the edge of my chair so tightly that my fingers hurt. Though I barely noticed. My lawyer whispered something meant to reassure me, but her words barely registered. All I could focus on was the scene in front of me. Judge Susan Brooks, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp gaze and a no-nonsense demeanor, was the one deciding the future of my world, my daughter, Chloe. She sat high above the room, her face a mask of authority as she scanned the documents in front of her. Across the aisle sat Andrew Walker, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that likely cost more than I earned in a year. He was calm, collected, exuding confidence in a way that made me feel small. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued man who had painted me as a well-meaning but inadequate mother, sat beside him, flipping through papers with the same cold efficiency. I could hear the whispers in the courtroom, hushed voices blending with the sound of shuffling papers and muffled sobs. My heart pounded as Judge Brooks raised her gavel, the sharp sound silencing the room instantly. I held my breath, knowing that everything I had fought for came down to this moment. In the case of Mitchell versus Walker regarding the custody of the minor child, Chloe Walker, the judge began, her voice firm but steady. This court finds it in the best interest of the child to grant full custody to her father, Andrew Walker. The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I felt like I might faint. My hands trembled as I gripped the chair tighter, my nails digging into the fabric. Next to me, my lawyer placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, murmuring words of comfort that felt hollow in the wake of the judge's pronouncement. The evidence presented demonstrates that Mr. Walker can provide the financial stability and resources necessary for the upbringing of a young child, the judge continued, her tone as neutral as the words themselves. While Ms. Mitchell's love for her child is evident, the economic reality cannot be ignored. I barely heard the rest. My world had crumbled in those few sentences. The tears started to fall before I could stop them, silent streams running down my face as I tried to process what had just happened. Across the room, Andrew sat perfectly composed, though I noticed the faintest flicker of triumph in his otherwise stoic expression. Meanwhile, I felt shattered, broken in a way I couldn't describe. How could anyone reduce my love for Chloe to something so clinical, so quantifiable? Did they not see that she was my entire world? The judge's gavel struck the sound block again, marking the end of the proceedings. Court is adjourned, she said. And just like that, it was over. People began to file out of the courtroom, their murmurs blending into an indistinct hum. I stayed in my seat, staring at the empty chair where Chloe had briefly sat during the proceedings. My daughter, only 3 years old, had clung to me earlier, refusing to let go until a kind bailiff had gently coaxed her away. Now she was gone, whisked away into a life far removed from the small, cluttered apartment where we had shared countless tender moments. Andrew walked out of the courtroom with his legal team, his confident stride carrying him toward the luxury car waiting for him outside. He had won, but the weight of what he had taken lingered in the air. Chloe wasn't just a prize to be fought over, she was a little girl who needed love, stability, and understanding. And now she was gone, Judge Brooks retreated to her chambers, her face impassive as she disappeared behind the heavy wooden door. I wondered if she felt the weight of her decision, or if she had already moved on to the next case. To her, this might have been just another custody battle, another file in a stack of many. But to me, it was my life. Chloe was my life. I finally left the courtroom, my legs weak and unsteady as I made my way to the exit. Outside, the sun was shining, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I sat on a bench near the steps, clutching my purse as though it were an anchor. People passed by without a second glance, their lives continuing uninterrupted while mine had come to a screeching halt. That night, my apartment felt emptier than ever. Chloe's toys were scattered across the floor, untouched. Her favorite stuffed bunny, worn from years of love, lay on the couch where she had last left it. I picked it up, pressing it to my chest as the tears came again. My daughter was gone, taken to a life of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, a world so far removed from our little home. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at an empty plate. My appetite was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that nothing could fill. Next to me, a stack of unopened bills loomed, a constant reminder of the life I had struggled to maintain. Beside them was a smaller pile of colorful envelopes, letters I had written to Chloe. I knew they might never reach her, but writing them was the only way I could feel close to her. That night, I picked up a pen and began another letter. Dear Chloe, I wrote, my handwriting careful and deliberate. Today I saw a bird outside the window. It reminded me of how much you love to watch them. I hope you're smiling today, my sweet girl. I miss you more than words can say. Far away, in the sprawling Walker estate, Chloe's world looked entirely different. Andrew's mansion was a monument to wealth, with marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and manicured gardens stretching as far as the eye could see. Chloe had everything a child could dream of: dolls, stuffed animals, a playhouse. But none of it seemed to matter. She sat in her nursery, clutching the same stuffed bunny I had slipped into her bag that day, her small hands holding it tightly as though it were the last thread connecting her to me. In her silence, I knew my love still reached her, and in my solitude, I vowed that this was not the end of our story. I would fight for her, no matter what it took. I would bring Chloe home. The days after the court ruling blurred together in a haze of grief and disbelief. My small apartment in San Antonio, once filled with Chloe's laughter, now echoed with a deafening silence. Her toys remained where she'd left them: a plastic tea set on the living room rug, a puzzle with a missing piece on the coffee table. I couldn't bring myself to move them. They were the last tangible reminders of the little girl who had been taken from me. Each morning, I woke up expecting to hear her tiny footsteps padding down the hallway, her sleepy voice calling, "Mommy, I'm hungry." Instead, there was nothing. No giggles, no playful chaos, just the relentless hum of the city outside my window. I tried to keep myself busy, throwing myself into work at the diner where I picked up extra shifts. The long hours left me physically exhausted, but no amount of work could dull the ache in my chest. In contrast, Chloe's new life at Andrew's mansion in Austin was one of extravagance and abundance. From the moment she arrived, the staff worked tirelessly to ensure she had everything she could ever want, or, rather, everything Andrew thought she needed. Her nursery was transformed into a child's paradise, with shelves lined with pristine dolls, plush animals, and books. A miniature playhouse was erected in the backyard, complete with a slide and flower boxes overflowing with petunias. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a picture-perfect world. But Chloe didn't seem to notice. She spent most of her time sitting in the corner of her nursery, clutching her stuffed bunny, the same one I had slipped into her bag on the day of the ruling. Her nanny, Mrs. Turner, a kind woman with a warm smile, tried everything to coax her out of her shell. "Look, Chloe," she would say, holding up a puzzle or a picture book. Would you like to play with this? But Chloe barely responded. She would glance at the door, her eyes hopeful, as if she were waiting for someone who would never come. Andrew watched from the doorway one afternoon, his arms crossed over his chest. She just needs time, he muttered to himself, retreating to his office. There, he surrounded himself with work, drowning in financial reports and conference calls. But even as he buried himself in the familiar rhythms of his career, a nagging sense of failure gnawed at him. He had fought so hard for Chloe, convinced that his wealth and resources would give her the life she deserved. Yet her silence, her refusal to engage with the world around her, told a different story. Meanwhile, I clung to small rituals to keep my connection to Chloe alive. Each night, after finishing a grueling shift at the diner, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote her a letter. The colorful envelopes piled up next to my unpaid bills, a vivid contrast to the stark reality of my circumstances. Dear Chloe, I wrote one evening, tears blurring the ink. I hope you're playing with your toys and smiling that beautiful smile of yours. I miss you so much. I'll never stop loving you. In my mind, I imagined her holding those letters, feeling the love I had poured onto the pages. But deep down, I knew she might never see them. Still, writing to her was the only way I could feel close to her. It gave me hope, however fragile, that one day she might return. Judge Susan Brooks, who had delivered the verdict that shattered my world, wasn't immune to the consequences of her decision. Sitting alone in her chambers late one evening, she reviewed the latest report from the court-appointed child welfare liaison overseeing Chloe's adjustment. Lily appears withdrawn, the report stated. She shows limited engagement in her new environment, despite significant resources allocated for her emotional development. The child displays signs of distress, particularly at bedtime, where she cries inconsolably for extended periods. The clinical language did little to mask the stark reality of Chloe's pain. Judge Brooks set the report aside. Leaning back in her chair, her mind replayed the scene in the courtroom, my tear-streaked face, my trembling hands. She's my whole world, I had told her, my voice breaking with emotion. At the time, the judge had convinced herself that financial stability outweighed emotional bonds. But now, reading about Chloe's struggles, she wasn't so sure. Andrew, too, couldn't escape the growing sense that something was missing. One rainy evening, he stood in Chloe's nursery, watching her as she sat on the floor with her bunny. She didn't look up when he entered, her small shoulders hunched in quiet defeat. He crouched beside her, his voice soft. Chloe, do you want to read a story with me? For a moment, she hesitated, clutching her bunny tighter. Then, slowly, she handed him a picture book. Andrew sat cross-legged on the carpet, his deep voice filling the room as he read aloud. As the minutes passed, Chloe inched closer to him, her small body leaning against his side. It was a fleeting moment of connection, but it left Andrew feeling more vulnerable than he cared to admit. Later that night, Andrew called Mrs. Turner. How is she? He asked, his voice low. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mrs. Turner replied gently. She's quiet, Mr. Walker. She doesn't eat much. And, she calls for her mother in her sleep. Andrew's chest tightened, the words hitting him harder than he expected. Thank you, he said, hanging up before she could hear the crack in his voice. He sat in the dim glow of his office, staring at his reflection in the window. For all his wealth and determination, he realized with a sinking feeling that he might not be what Chloe needed most. As I sat alone in my apartment that night, I felt the weight of Chloe's absence like never before. But even in my darkest moments, I refused to give up. Chloe was my daughter, my heart, and my soul. And no matter how impossible it seemed, I would find a way to bring her back home. Weeks turned into months, but time did little to dull the ache in my heart. Each day was a constant reminder of what I had lost. Yet it also fueled my determination. Chloe wasn't just my daughter, she was a part of me. And I wasn't going to let her slip away. The world around me kept moving. But my life was stuck in a painful limbo, defined by the absence of her laughter, her hugs, and her tiny voice calling me mommy. One night, as I sat in my dimly lit kitchen, surrounded by the letters I had written to Chloe, the television played softly in the background. A news segment caught my attention, freezing me in place. The story was about Andrew Walker, philanthropist, innovator, and now, celebrated family man. The camera panned over his sprawling Austin estate, focusing on the manicured gardens and the lavish home where Chloe now lived. My breath caught as I saw her on the screen, clutching her stuffed bunny. Even from a distance, even through a television screen, I could see the emptiness in her eyes. The reporter praised Andrew's commitment to providing his daughter with the best life possible. But I knew the truth. I could see it in Chloe's hunched shoulders and the way she clung to her bunny like a lifeline. She wasn't happy. She wasn't thriving. She was surviving. And it broke my heart. "I'm going to fight for you, Chloe," I whispered, gripping the edge of the table. "I don't know how, but I will." The next morning, I called Marissa, a social worker I had met through the diner where I worked. Marissa had always been kind, offering quiet words of encouragement during my toughest days. When I told her about the news segment and my plans to fight for custody, she didn't hesitate. "Let's get started," she said firmly. "You've got a long road ahead. But you're not alone." With Marissa's help, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. She connected me with resources, including a culinary training program that could help me secure a better job. I enrolled immediately, throwing myself into the classes with a focus I hadn't felt in months. Every lesson, every dish I learned to prepare, felt like a step closer to bringing Chloe home. But it wasn't just about proving I could provide for Chloe. I needed to show the court that she wasn't thriving without me. That's where Marissa's expertise came in. She coached me on gathering evidence, reports, testimonials, anything that could support my case. It was daunting. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I thought of Chloe's face, her little hands clutching that bunny, and I kept going. Across town, Andrew was also grappling with his own doubts. Late one evening, he sat in his office, surrounded by financial reports that suddenly felt meaningless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Chloe, to the way she cried at bedtime and the rare moments when she let him hold her hand. He had won the custody battle, but at what cost? That night, he called Mrs. Turner. "How is she?" he asked, his voice heavy with fatigue. "She's quiet, Mr. Walker." Mrs. Turner replied gently. "She plays with her toys. But it's different. She misses her mother." The words hung in the air long after the call ended. Andrew leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. Was he holding on to Chloe out of love? Or out of pride? As my determination grew, so did my preparation. Marissa introduced me to Ryan Adler, a young attorney who specialized in family law. Ryan had an earnest energy and a genuine desire to help. When I first walked into his small office, I felt a mix of hope and fear. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "I've reviewed your case, and I think we have a real shot." I exhaled, relief flooding through me. "What do I need to do?" I asked, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. "We need to show the court that you've taken significant steps to improve your situation," Ryan explained. "The culinary program is a great start. We'll also need proof that Chloe's current environment might not be meeting her emotional needs." I nodded, determined to give it everything I had. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence Marissa and I had gathered, my enrollment papers, a letter of recommendation from my employer at the diner, glowing testimonials from neighbors who had witnessed my bond with Chloe. Among the pile was one of the letters I had written to her. detailing a day we had spent at the park. I added it to the stack, hoping it would remind the court of the love and connection Chloe and I shared. Meanwhile, Andrew found himself increasingly conflicted. One evening, he wandered into Chloe's nursery and found her asleep on the floor, clutching her bunny. The room, filled with pastel furniture and expensive toys, felt cold and lifeless. As he watched her sleep, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. For all his efforts to give Chloe the best life, she was still a little girl yearning for her mother. The following week, Ryan filed the petition to reopen the custody case. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment that evening, staring out at the city lights, I whispered a quiet promise to Chloe, "I'm coming for you, baby. Just hold on." The petition to reopen the custody case was a spark of hope I had been desperate for. But it was just the beginning. I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Still, the thought of holding Chloe in my arms again gave me the strength to press on. Every step, no matter how small, brought me closer to her. The court granted a supervised visitation, allowing me to see Chloe for the first time in months. When I received the notice, I burst into tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. For weeks, I had imagined this moment, wondered how she would react to seeing me. Would she remember me? Would she feel the same connection we had before? On the day of the visit, I arrived at the small, brightly colored room designated for supervised meetings. The walls were painted with cheerful murals of animals and trees, and a basket of toys sat in the corner, waiting for little hands to reach for them. I paced nervously, my heart racing as I waited for Chloe to arrive. When the door finally opened, my breath caught. There she was, my little girl, clutching her stuffed bunny, her curls longer than I remembered. She hesitated in the doorway, her big eyes darting around the room until they landed on me. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, time seeming to freeze. "Chloe," I whispered, dropping to my knees and opening my arms. "It's Mommy." Her tiny face lit up with recognition. And in an instant, she was running toward me. I caught her in a tight embrace, holding her as though I might never let go. "Hi, baby," I murmured, tears streaming down my face. "I missed you so much." Chloe buried her face in my shoulder, her little hands clutching at my shirt. "Mama," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Then, more clearly, she repeated, "Mama." It was the first word I had heard her speak in months, and it broke something open inside me. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. "Mama's here." Mrs. Turner, who had accompanied Chloe to the visit, stood quietly in the corner, her expression a mix of surprise and warmth. She later told me it was the first time Chloe had spoken since moving to the mansion. For the next hour, Chloe and I played together, her laughter filling the room like music. She showed me her bunny, told me about the books she liked, and even asked me to sing her favorite lullaby. It was as though no time had passed between us. And for the first time since losing custody, I felt whole again. When the visit ended, handing her back to Mrs. Turner was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Chloe clung to me, her small hands gripping mine as though she didn't want to let go. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll see you again soon. I promise." As they walked away, Chloe turned back and waved, her bunny tucked under one arm. It was a moment I would replay in my mind 1,000 times. A bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. But it also solidified my determination. I wasn't just fighting for custody anymore, I was fighting for Chloe's happiness. For the love that only a mother could give. Meanwhile, the visit left an impact on Andrew as well. When Mrs. Turner returned to the mansion, she told him about Chloe's first word and the way she had lit up in her mother's presence. "She called her Mama," Mrs. Turner said gently. It's the happiest I've seen her since she came here." Andrew sat in his office that night, the words echoing in his mind. For all his wealth and resources, he couldn't ignore the truth. Chloe's heart still belonged to her mother. He had fought so hard to give her everything. Yet she still cried for Emily at night, still clung to the stuffed bunny as though it were a lifeline. He called his attorney, David, the following morning. "We need to discuss a potential custody agreement," Andrew said, his voice unusually subdued. David sounded surprised. "Are you saying you're willing to share custody?" Andrew hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I'm saying, I want what's best for Chloe. And maybe that means rethinking what I thought was right." On the other side of town, I continued preparing for the next phase of the case. With Ryan's guidance, I gathered letters of support from friends and neighbors, people who had seen firsthand the bond Chloe and I shared. Marissa helped me draft a detailed account of my progress, my culinary training, my steady income from the diner, and my plans to provide Chloe with a stable, loving home. The weeks passed quickly, each day a blur of preparation and work. But the memory of that supervised visit, of Chloe calling me Mama, gave me strength. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey, my love for her was worth every fight, every sacrifice. As the next court date approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. I knew Andrew was reconsidering his stance, but I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. I had to prove, beyond any doubt, that I was ready to have Chloe back in my life. For her, I would give everything I had. This was only the beginning. The morning of the next court hearing arrived with a mixture of dread and determination. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, collecting evidence, drafting testimony, and imagining every possible outcome. As I stood in the mirror adjusting my blouse, I whispered to myself, "For Chloe." It was a quiet mantra, a reminder of why I couldn't let fear take over. Ryan met me at the courthouse, his usual confident demeanor intact. "You've done the work, Emily," he said as we walked toward the courtroom. "This is your moment to show the judge just how much Chloe needs you." His words were reassuring, but my nerves remained. Inside, the courtroom was eerily quiet. The polished floors and high ceilings amplified every sound, the shuffle of papers, the clicking of heels, the occasional cough. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the room sat Andrew, his expression serious but not unkind. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in his gaze I hadn't expected: doubt. Judge Susan Brooks entered the courtroom with her usual composure, her sharp eyes scanning the room before she settled into her seat. "We are here today to revisit the custody arrangement for Chloe Walker," she began, her tone neutral but firm. "Both parties have presented additional evidence, and we will hear from each of you before making a decision." Ryan began by presenting our case. He spoke of the steps I had taken to improve my situation, my enrollment in a culinary program, my steady job, and the letters of support from friends and neighbors. He emphasized the bond between Chloe and me, using the supervised visitation as evidence of her emotional connection to her mother. She called her mother Mama for the first time during that visit, Ryan said, his voice steady but impassioned. "This is not just a case about financial stability. It's about the irreplaceable bond between a child and the person who has loved and cared for her from the moment she was born." Andrew's attorney, David, countered with his own arguments, citing Andrew's ability to provide Chloe with a stable and resource-rich environment. "Mr. Walker has done everything in his power to ensure Chloe's happiness and well-being," David said, his tone polished and measured. "He has provided her with access to the best educational and emotional resources available." But even as David spoke, I noticed Andrew shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His usual air of confidence was replaced by a quiet tension. When it was his turn to speak, Andrew hesitated for a moment before rising to his feet. "I fought for custody because I believed it was the best thing for Chloe," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual conviction. I thought that providing her with everything she could possibly need would make her happy. But I've learned that material things can't replace the love of a mother. His words hung in the air. And for a moment, I forgot to breathe. Andrew glanced at me, his expression softening. Chloe needs her mother, he continued. She needs Emily. And I'm willing to share custody because I believe it's what's best for her. A murmur spread through the courtroom, and Judge Brooks raised her gavel to restore order. Thank you, Mr. Walker, she said, her tone thoughtful. This court will take everything into consideration before making a final ruling. As the judge adjourned the hearing, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Andrew's words had changed everything. For the first time, I felt as though we were no longer adversaries but two people working toward the same goal, Chloe's happiness. Outside the courthouse, Andrew approached me. His hands were in his pockets, and his posture was more relaxed than I had ever seen it. Emily, he began, his voice quieter than usual. I want you to know that I'm not doing this out of guilt. I'm doing it because it's the right thing for Chloe. I nodded, my throat tightening with emotion. Thank you, I managed to say. That means more than you know. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork and discussions. Together, with the help of our attorneys, we crafted a joint custody agreement that would allow Chloe to spend equal time with both of us. I would have her for alternating weeks. Holidays would be shared, and major decisions about her education and health would be made together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When the agreement was finalized, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time since the custody battle began, I felt like Chloe's future was truly in good hands. It wasn't just about me or Andrew anymore, it was about creating a life where Chloe could thrive, surrounded by love and support. Our first official exchange of custody was both bittersweet and hopeful. Andrew arrived at my apartment with Chloe, her little suitcase in hand. She ran to me the moment she saw me, her face lighting up with joy. "Mama," she cried, throwing her arms around my neck. I held her tightly, tears streaming down my face. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "I missed you so much." As Andrew stood in the doorway, watching the reunion, I saw a faint smile cross his face. It was a moment of unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of what mattered most, Chloe's happiness. That evening, as I tucked Chloe into bed, she clutched her stuffed bunny and looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mama," she murmured. "I love you. I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, brushing a kiss against her forehead. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't the end of our journey, it was the beginning of something new. Something better. Together, we would build a future where Chloe could feel loved, safe, and whole. The transition into joint custody wasn't without its challenges, but it was filled with small victories that made the journey worthwhile. Chloe's return to my home for alternating weeks brought a sense of completeness I hadn't felt in months. Our tiny apartment, though humble compared to Andrew's sprawling mansion, was alive again with her laughter, her chatter, and the unmistakable energy of a little girl rediscovering joy. The first week was magical. Chloe and I fell back into our routines almost as though no time had passed. She helped me bake cookies in our small kitchen, flour dusting her curls as she giggled at my failed attempts to toss dough like a pro. We spent hours at the park, her tiny hand gripping mine as she dragged me to the swings. At night, I sang her favorite lullabies, and she would snuggle close, her stuffed bunny tucked securely under her arm. But there were moments of adjustment too. Chloe asked questions that were both heartbreaking and profound. "Mama, why can't I stay here all the time?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. Her big eyes searched mine, seeking answers that I wasn't sure how to give. I sat down beside her, stroking her curls. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "you have two homes now. One with me, and one with Daddy. And no matter where you are, you're surrounded by love." She seemed to accept my words. But I could see the lingering confusion in her expression. It was in these moments that I reminded myself this arrangement wasn't just about me, it was about giving Chloe the stability and love she needed to grow. On the weeks Chloe was with Andrew, the apartment felt quieter, emptier. I filled the time by focusing on my culinary training, which was nearing completion. The program wasn't just a career path, it was my promise to Chloe that I would build a future where she would never have to doubt her place in the world. Meanwhile, Andrew was also adapting to his new role as a co-parent. The first few transitions were awkward. Dropping Chloe off at my apartment or picking her up felt like stepping into foreign territory for both of us. But over time, we found a rhythm. Brief chats turned into longer conversations, and a tentative sense of partnership began to form. One evening, as Andrew dropped Chloe off, he lingered in the doorway longer than usual. "She talks about you all the time," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "She's happy here. She talks about you too," I replied. "She's starting to open up more. I think this is working." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's because of her. She deserves this." As the months went by, Andrew and I began to coordinate more activities together. When Chloe had her preschool recital, we sat side by side in the tiny auditorium, clapping in unison as she waved enthusiastically from the stage. Afterward, we shared a moment of quiet pride as we watched her play with her classmates, her laughter echoing in the warm spring air. One day, Chloe made a request that neither of us had anticipated. "Can Daddy come over for dinner?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope. "I want us all to eat together." The idea took me by surprise, but I saw the sincerity in her eyes. "Maybe," I said cautiously, not wanting to promise something I couldn't deliver. But that night, I sat at the kitchen table, considering the possibility. Could Andrew and I really find a way to bridge the gap for Chloe's sake? Eventually, we agreed. A few weeks later, Andrew joined us for dinner in my small apartment. It wasn't an elaborate affair, just spaghetti and garlic bread, but it was enough to make Chloe's face light up with joy. She talked non-stop throughout the meal, her excitement filling the room as Andrew and I exchanged hesitant smiles. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Over time, these shared moments became more frequent. They weren't just for Chloe, they were for us too. A way to build a foundation of trust and cooperation. And with each passing day, Chloe seemed to blossom. Her laughter grew louder, her confidence stronger. She was no longer the quiet, withdrawn child caught between two worlds. She was a little girl surrounded by love. 5 years later, as Chloe stood on the stage at her elementary school graduation, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Her light blue cap and gown looked too big on her tiny frame, but her smile was radiant as she clutched her certificate. "Did you see me? Mama, did you see me? Daddy?" she asked, her voice bursting with excitement. "We saw you, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You were amazing," Andrew added, crouching to her level. "The best one up there." Chloe giggled, her laughter a sound that had become the anchor for both of us. In that moment, standing together as a family, I realized how far we had come. The journey had been painful, filled with uncertainty and heartache, but it had also been transformative. Andrew and I had learned to set aside our differences, to focus on what truly mattered, Chloe's happiness. Later that evening, as I tucked Chloe into bed, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "I love you, Mama," she whispered. "I love you too, baby," I replied, brushing a kiss against her forehead. As I stood in the doorway, watching her drift off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was our new chapter, a story of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Together, we had created something extraordinary, a family. As the years passed, the bonds between our little family grew stronger. Chloe thrived, surrounded by love and care from both her parents. Though Andrew and I came from different worlds, we learned to work together, always prioritizing Chloe's happiness. Our journey wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on love, compromise, and the unshakable determination to give Chloe the life she deserved. That evening, as I watched Chloe play in the backyard, her laughter echoing in the twilight, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the challenges that shaped us, the lessons we learned, and the love that carried us through. Standing beside me, Andrew smiled as Chloe ran toward us, her arms wide open. "Mama, Daddy," she called, her face glowing with joy. In that moment, I realized that despite everything, we had created something beautiful, a family built not on perfection, but on love. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more tales of love, resilience, and inspiration. Together, let's continue celebrating the extraordinary power of human connection.